Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We are continuing on Masechet Sanhedrin. I'm on Daf Chaf Hey Amud Bet. 4 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Today's Amud is being learned. This is the Chud Rufa Shel Ma for Rachel Simcha Bad Nahid, Rachel Bracha Bad Aidna, Hayim Ben Rachel, own Victor Yisrael, the Shel Rufa Shel Ma Betoch Shar Chol Yisrael. Amen. This month's learning of the community has been dedicated by Dr. and Mrs. Shea. Should be an ultimate zchud for their mishpacha as well. So, continuing on the list of the infamous list of people who are pasul for edut, the Mishnah mentioned ro'e bakar. Really, the ro'im, the shepherds who are pasul, became a discussion in the Gemara if it's only ro'e bakar, or is it only the shepherds of sheep, or is it as well ro'e bakar included? And says the Gemara, depends really where they are in Eretz Yisrael, Chutz La'aretz. If they are professional shepherds, that they take the sheep, the cows outside, and then for sure you're dealing with grazing on other people's property, or people who are doing it privately in their own barns, which is much more closed and controllable, and therefore it's going to be only a challenge with the little ones, with the goats that are jumping on and off the walls and going to other people's properties, versus having cows that are more, the larger, they can't really run away, and so on. Says the Gemara now, we have an assumption when it comes to dealing with people who have jobs that are questionable, depending on how questionable it is. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda says, Stam ro'eh pasul. A regular person who's a shepherd, you could already assume that they're pasul, and until otherwise is proven, you will invalidate them for being an ed. But stam gabai kasher. Now, the Gemara had previously said that gabaye mas, the tax collectors, also are pasul because Chachamim realized that they would often abuse the power of collecting taxes for the king to collect more, because everyone has to listen to them. So you come in, you say taxes are higher this year because of whatever reason, and you would be collecting more so than you were obligated from the king, and therefore they would be considered also thieves and would be pasul le'edut. Now the Gemara says that's not an assumption that automatically ought to be had until you prove it. And the Gemara is going to bring a story to prove this case, that we could have actually great tax collectors that are honest and not taking advantage of their power to collect more for themselves. Avuha de Rabbi Zera, the famous Rabbi Zera who went from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, and he davened and fasted so many times to forget the complex, difficult back and forth of Talmud Bavli, and to learn Talmud Yerushalmi, to be able to learn the Torah of Eretz Yisrael. His father actually was a tax collector. So Avuha, the Rabbi Zera, Avad Gabayuta Teresarshin, for 13 years, he was the one in charge of taxes. Now, the way he dealt with it, Ki Hava Ati Reshnara, when the head of the river, basically the head of town, then they would come to visit the town and to see how their subjects are doing. Ki hava chazi rabbanan, when he saw the chachamim, he knew that the head of town, the governor, is coming in. He would read them a pasuk to the chachamim. Would say lech ami bo b'chadarecha. Say the pasuk of people go and hide in your rooms ad yavor zam, until the danger passes. In other words, he was trying to be as lenient as halachically possible, considering the Dina, the Malchut Dina, that the law of government is actually halachically binding, so there are certain exemptions to that. Chachamim being included in some of those exemptions, as the Gemara says in multiple places. Masechet Batra is what we mentioned before. So he would give them these leniencies, but now the governor is coming in. If you have a flourishing town with people all over the place and so on, he's like, wait a second, the quota that you give, maybe it's not enough, and going through it with a fine-tooth comb and trying to figure out everything would become actually very dangerous for people. This is dealing with people who could judge and kill and so on. It was not fun, and therefore it was good for him and for the community that when he came to town, when he saw like a ghost town and nobody's there, so I say, Lechami bo b'chadarecha. Avoid public sceneries for a few days until the other town is gone. And when he saw regular people, the non-Talmidei Chachamim, he would tell them also a hint of such. He would say, Resh Mata is coming. Basically, he would say, Resh Nara ata lemata v'ha'idna nachis abba lepum, bra lepum abba. So the head of town is coming, governor is coming, and now he's going to be slaughtering sons on fathers, fathers on sons. Obviously, he was not going to slaughter anyone. But what it means is, the support that people give to their father, the support that the fathers give to the sons, if that's cut, the livelihood of the family would be affected tremendously. That's like, when you take away the ability from a father to support his kids, that's like killing his kids. When you take away the opportunity, the ability of supporting the elderly parents from children, that's like you killed their parents. So therefore, says, look, this could be very, very negative. They come in, you don't know what mood they're in, and who knows. So go, don't show yourself off. Let it be, seems that the taxes that they're collecting is b'midat tovah, they're collecting more than they could even imagine, and let them be happy. So says the Gemara. Now there's a lot of discussion why he would say it differently to the Chachamim versus a regular layman. Was it because he could trust them more and know that there's no no spies, so to speak, to get him into trouble? Is it because of that, or is it because halachically the p'tur of the Rabbanan is more so than a regular layman? That's a discussion in the Mefarshei HaTalmud, but over here says the Gemara, Umiknezu kula alma, everyone would go into hiding. So the Resh Mata would come in, the red carpet would be rolled out, and he comes in as a ghost town. Nobody's there. Ki ati amale mimani bais. You see how much taxes I'm collecting for you? There's nobody even to collect taxes from over here. So you should be really happy that you're collecting the amount that you're collecting. So says the Gemara, when he passed away, as he's on his deathbed, he says, Shekulu tles armai, there are 13 coins that I have wrapped away in a specific place, in my sadin, vehadru lele palania, and give it to so-and-so. In other words, he was returning, imagine a tax collector that instead of overcharging people for his own selfish purposes, the thing that he's thinking and talking about right before he dies is, well, I have 13 coins that I collected from someone and I didn't end up needing it, and therefore you should make sure to return it to him. I collected from him, and at the end I was able to get away with less, and therefore these 13 coins should be returned to their owner. So again, talking about honest tax collectors, you definitely find those. Now again, there's a discussion over here. Why is he called Avu had Rab Zera? Rab Zera being a very famous person, we could understand it even on face value. But there is a discussion that even though that you see from him, usually when you call someone Avuha to someone, you are avoiding mentioning their name. That's what it is. So over here in this case, the Mefashim write that the reason for it is because even though that he was a very good man, at the end of the day, like we say by Mordechai HaTzadik, that he was ratzui lerov echav, he was beloved and admired by the majority of Yidden. And the Gemara in Megillah that we learned together was that because he was involved with politics, because he was involved with government, he wasn't able to learn as much as a regular person would be able to learn. So even though that it comes with perks of having someone like Mordechai HaTzadik in the government, with having someone like Avuha the Reb Zera in the government, still the lack of learning Torah for a Talmid Chacham is something that's not admirable in that way. So therefore, Ratzui lerov echav by Mordechai. Therefore, Avuha the Rabbi Zera by the father of Rabbi Zera. This actually brings up a question. One of the most mentioned Amoraim in the entire Shas is Avuha Dishmuel. Avuha Dishmuel was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He's mentioned all over the place. His name was Abba Bar Abba, right? He actually was Gabbai Tzedakah, because Gabbai Tzedakah are tremendously, they're not to be mixed with the tax collectors. The tzedakah collectors were admired by Chazal in a way that nobody else is admired in that way. Gadol ha'maaseh yoter min ha'oseh, says the Gemara in Batra, Taftet, of the tremendous chut that they have. They bring the Geula, whoever helps the cause of the Torah collecting and helping distribute the funds for aniyim, for kolalim, for tzedakahs, for causes of Torah. That was Avuha Dishmuel. So over there, the reason that we call him Avuha Dishmuel instead of calling him Abba Bar Abba, which is what his name was, is twofold. One is because Shmuel was so big, even though the Avuha Dishmuel was very big, but Shmuel was such a towering personality of Torah, and he was the head of the Bedin, Halakha Kishmuel Bedini, and so on. He was in astronomy, in every which way. He was so big, clearly so much bigger, head and shoulder and more, above and beyond other people, that still would be a kavod for him to be known as the father of his son, rather than his son being known as the son of his father. So that's one of the main simple reasons. And the second reason is because when Shmuel was born, his father was not in town. And there was kind of a question, how the father of Shmuel was actually his father. And the reality of it is a very complex travel method that he had, that the Gemara actually discusses, using the Shem and so on and so forth. And therefore, in order to deal with Letzarei Hador, for people's coffers, the community called him Avuha Dishmuel, the father of Shmuel, in a miraculous way. If he was looking like him or not, like Yitzchak Avinu, the son of Avraham Avinu, that had the scoffers of the first scoffers of the generation. The Zohar HaKadosh says it was Ishmael, actually, as it says in Rashi as well. They would say that Avraham all these years didn't have a child with Sarah, and all of a sudden she goes to Paro, and she goes to Avimelech, and then she has a child. Must be. The truth of the matter is, by the way, that Ishmael himself was the son of Avraham Avinu, and he's the scoffer, right? So it's not that Avraham Avinu couldn't have a child, but that's how Letzanut works. Letzanut doesn't have to add up and check the boxes. Once you start the koach of Letzanut, one of the four people that don't see Pnei Shechina are Letzanim, right? Why? Because it destroys the positivity that could be there, and even though that you disprove it, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't need to be proven or disproven, does not really hurt it, because the power of Letzanut is once you mock something, once it's out, then even if you try to actually prove it, like the case of Ishmael himself, it's still, the damage is already there. So therefore, by case of Avuha Dishmuel, we call him Avuha Dishmuel to make sure for generations to come, everyone knows that Abba Bar Abba was, in truth, the father of Shmuel. But nevertheless, that is speaking about the concept of gabaye, the tax, gabaye mas, the tax collectors, not being automatically pasul. They're not automatically pasul. They are kasher unless otherwise proven, unlike the shepherds that they are pasul unless otherwise proven. Says the Gemara, weiter. Amar Rabbi Shimon Batchila Hayu Korin Otan. This is now going back to our regular program of the Mishnah, that the last item on the list, the infamous list of the Psulei Edut, is Sochare Shavit. And we learned that initially they would call them Osafei Shavit. Initially they were called the people who were gathering produce and fruits on Shvi'it, and then they changed their name and they called them Sochare Shvi'it. Right? So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Shimon Betchila Hayu Korin Otan Osfei Shvi'it. This that initially their name was Osfei Shvi'it, the ones who gathered on Shvi'it. Micah, what is exactly saying here? So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Hachikamar. Betchila, in the beginning, Hay Omrim Osfei Shvi'it Kesherin, Sochare Shvi'it Pesulin. They would say, well, if you gather fruits on Shvi'it, you're still kasher, because what's exactly the problem? You're good. So people started creating a loophole. They said, fine, let us deal with the aniyim. We give them some money for them to go collect lots of fruits and they bring it to us. Then we could, nobody sees us doing anything, because osvei shvit are kasher. So they were using this loophole to do business with perot shvit. Once Chazal caught on to that, they said, no, everyone is pasul. So Sochare shvit are pasul, osvei shvit are pasul, everyone is pasul. Ve'azli aniyim ve'asvi lehu mighty. Aniyim would go gather and come give it to them and get paid for doing this, obviously doing business, but in a back doorway. Chazru lomar, Chachamim said, once they realized this, echad zeh ve'echad zeh pesulim. Now even osvei shvit, they wanted to stop this, and therefore the aniyim didn't want to become pasul edut, and they stopped doing this. This is how Chazal put in a stop to it. So says the Gemara, Kashu b'nei Rechavam. The Gemara has a problem with this because the language that we used was in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Batchila hayu korin otan osvei shvi'it, misher nitrabu anasim. Once they became hamisher rabu ha'anasim. Anasim means people who would force. This doesn't sound like anyone forcing anyone. This is just the smart business people or Rashaim hiring the Aniyim to give them fruits of Shvi'it. So that doesn't read well with Anasim. Misharabu ha-Tagarim I should say, from the moment that the Tagarim, the business people, became a lot at abusing the system. And the Gemara now reverses it. It says, no, the real pshat is like this. In the beginning, they said everyone is pasul. Whether you're actually outright doing business with fruits of Shvi'it, or even if you're gathering a whole lot of it, you're still going to be pasul, because we don't know what's exactly happening over here. You're supposed to be le'ochla. You gather whatever you need to eat. If you're doing more than that, it's questionable and you're pasul. Misharabu ha'anasin, once the government started pressuring, in other words, they said Shvi'it, not Shvi'it, doesn't make a difference. You got to pay taxes. And taxes are not avoidable, even on the time that you cannot plow, plant, and harvest. And therefore, people now have to actually go gather, not because they wanted to eat, not because they were doing business and making any money, but only because they had to go pay it to the government. Ma'ininu arnuna. It's the taxes that the king would charge. From that moment, Chazal said, the people who do business with are pasul, but the osfeh shevi'it are kasher. Because you're not gathering for yourself. Not only that, listen to what the Gemara says. Rabbi Yisraeli would actually have a public announcement encouraging people, puku veziru b'shvi'it, go and plant on Shvi'it to be able to give you taxes. Now this becomes a line in Gemara that is actually a source for a lot of leniencies in the halachot of Shvi'it. Why? Because if you take a look at Rashi answers this question. So wait a second. Because you have Anasi, you can work on Shabbat? Working on Shvi'it is Isur D'Oraita. Right? So how in the world are you working on Shvi'it just because they're Anasim? We never find a Rosh Hashiva making a clap on the bima and say, well, Rabbi Yisraeli, we have a problem over here, let's start working on Shabbat. So Rashi says, the reason that he was able to do that, Rabbi Yana, is because Shvi'it Bizman Hazeh is the Rabbanan. And that's why this line in the Gemara becomes, and that Rashi become a major line in the kulot that you have in the halachot of Shvi'it. The Tosfot doesn't necessarily go straight up with that, because the alternative pshat would be, that the anasim, the governor and the government, would be actually posing a danger to people's lives if you didn't do it. Because they were cruel, they didn't care. If you didn't give it, they would take your kids, they would put you in jail. Who knows what would have happened, right? We see in the Gemara regarding the governors and Jewish governors, the Masechet Sanhedrin, that when Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon became the Jewish policeman, so to speak, he had the power to actually kill people. You know, if you would catch somebody and say, there's no catch and release, the catch and release to Olam Haba. If they would catch somebody and say, okay, this guy should be hung, 5 minutes later, the guy was hung. The power, the absolute power that was attained by them, it was dangerous, simply dangerous. And therefore, Rabbi Yisraeli says, please do not mess with this. If they ask you to give, you go do it, because it has an element of sakarat nefashot. Fine, this is the top tosfot in the third line of the top tosfot. If you take a look, inami, the second answer of the Tosafot on this question is yesh lomar the pikuach nefesh, who it's considered pikuach nefesh, sheshoel lahem hamelech mas ve'en lahem maliten. If the king is asking you to give taxes and you don't have what to give, then no one knows what's going to happen to you, because you're not going to necessarily trust that you don't have to give, and trying to beat people up to tell them actually where you're hiding the money, it never ends well, and therefore it could be animal. So that becomes machlokes Rashi and Tosfot, if this is because Shvi'it Bizman is the Rabbanan, or maybe because this was pikuach nefesh, and even a deoraita would be pushed away because of pikuach nefesh. Yes?
Was Rabbi Yana in Eretz Israel, or was he outside Chutz?
Eretz Yisrael also was under the government of the Romans, really. It didn't make a difference, really, in, obviously Shvi'it is an Eretz Yisrael concept, but it doesn't mean that they are Jewish government.
But I'm wondering if he was outside of Eretz Israel, in which case it doesn't apply.
No, that's we're talking about Shvi'it in Eretz Yisrael, but Bizman Hazeh, that you don't have Shemitah v'Yovel in the same way as before, that becomes the question. And hence you have the Rashi. So says the Gemara, Chazar Umar, from that time that became difficult dealing with the government, they said, Osfin, Kesherin, Socharin, Psulim. That only the Tagarim, those who do business to make money, those are the ones who are pasul, but osvei shvi'it are kasher. Rabbi Chia bar Zarnuki Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak ka'azli le'aber shana be'asya. They were going for ibur shana. We have discussed this case before. Paga be'Resh Lakish. They're going, and Resh Lakish meets up with them. Itfil behadaihu. They're now going together with Resh Lakish. Amar izil ichzi hechi avli iwura. He says, I'm going to go and see how did they do this. So on the way, chazye, or the girsa on the side, it makes it plural form. Chazua lehahu gavra the car kariv. They see someone is working. It's shvit, right? So Amar lahen, Resh Lakish right away says to these two other talmidim, Hamim, kohen vechoresh. Says this guy is a kohen and he is chashud al shvit. Now the one later on is going to explain why a kohen would be a chashud al shvit, but that's right away what Resh Lakish told him. He says this guy must be a kohen and therefore he is chashud al shvit. He's doing a isur of choresh, and you guys have to go give him some musar. Amru lo yachol lomar agiston ani. They said, well, don't be too fast to judge him in a negative way, because he could say, I am an agiston. Rashi says, Sachir vekarka shel nochriu. I am just I'm a worker. It's not that I'm working my land. It's the land of a goy. I'm working. That's not asur. That's not asur. The isur is to work your land. If you have a land of a nochri and you're just the worker, so that's not included in that isur. Inami, says Rashi, mishum arnona secharo ba'al habayit lecharosh. Or you could say it's a land of a Jew, but because of the taxes that the king has put on the Jews, it's mutter, just like we had by Rabbi Yanai right now, right? So either or, says Rashi. So maybe you could give him the benefit of the doubt, say these two Tavachamim to Resh Lakish. Don't be too quick to judge him that he's chashud al hashvi'it. So says the Gemara, Tu chazyu alahu gavra. They saw another fellow that have a kasach bekarmi, that he was actually cutting branches in a vineyard, and he said to them again, Resh Lakish, Amar lahe kohen ve'zamar. He is a kohen, he's chashud al shvit, he's cutting his own lands, zemorot, hanavim, and you got to go stop him, you got to go give him some musar. Amru le, they said, Chacham, yachol lomar lakel. He could argue back, this fellow, that he's doing it for betabad, he's doing it for a mutter deka thing, that he's going to be using them for netting, basically, not for an isur of achila. That's the isur is doing business, so on and so forth. For the other srachim would be mutar la'akel betabad. So says the Gemara, Amar lahem halev yodea im le'ekel im la'akalkalot. So he played on the word of ekel la'akel betabad. He said, yeah. Only the heart of a person knows if he is doing it for betabad, he's doing it for the netting, or la'akalkalot because he's crooked. Right? That's the language. So the Gemara says, Ha'aman lehu bereisha. Which one is the story that happened first? Ilma ha kamaita. If you say that this first one happened first, Hanami limru agiston. Saying if this one happened first, you could have the argument, initial argument would work for the second case as well. That I'm a worker on a goy's land, or I'm doing it because the anasim. So why are they going through this twice? Right? They could say the same argument. Elaha amale beresha. The truth is that the order would be reversed. They first saw this guy that he had better arguments of the netting argument for Bet Habad, and then in the second case they didn't have that, so therefore Resh Lakish pushed them on that one, and the argument there was that they could be still arguing that this is a field of a goy or field of a Jew, but in case of pikuach nefesh or dealing with tax masters that are under duress, so to speak, collecting the fruits of Shvi'it, v'hadar amalehu hach. And then the second one was that. So Ma'isha says the Gemara. Well, we're out of time. Next time we're going to discuss. This really runs into the next Gemara. We'll see what the difference is with a Kohen. Why Resh Lakish right away jumped saying that this guy is a Kohen and the Kohen is Chashud al Shvi'it. Bezat Hashem will continue that in the next shiur. Hazak Baruch.